she was one of the producers on this year, and they invited us to one of them.
That's cool. Last time I went to the Maryland Theater, it was Gallagher.
This time I went, it was
Well, it's not the
Ron
Ron
White.
Theater, it's,
I can't stand it.
Yeah, Barbara Ingram. It's Barbara Ingram. She's one of them.
Gallagher was fun. So we're live. What's the topic this week? Did anybody do their homework? Compassion.
We just had that church too.
We did. So this should be very lively and instructive, specifically because we just talked about it. So the key question for this week is, what about the poor and injustice? Now, in reference, and I just dropped the book, but in reference to this whole idea of the poor, we all saw, I'm assuming, the outrage over the cost of EpiPens.
They dropped the price now.
Oh yeah, now it's only $300.
Yeah,
Because, you know, people who need them, we've all got $300 sitting around
Yeah.
for a good old supply of EpiPens.
which was $100 prior to.
Uh-huh. So,
Yeah, they dropped the price per unit, but now they only come in a 2-pack.
uh-huh.
There you
So
go.
it's the whole idea
Good morning.
that if you stop and you think about these kinds of things, it's interesting to note the Bible talks about an idea in Revelation where it assumes in one of the prophetic words for that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. So that there is this evaporation of a middle. Now, historically, was there a middle class? Historically. Think about history for a minute.
Yeah, there had to be, man. There had to be somebody in the middle,
No,
man.
I
His-
think so.
You don't-
You had the lords and you had the serfs.
You don't really get a middle class until the Middle Ages, when things like the textile industry really come into play. And since we're talking about the poor, and since the Friends Debbie's trying to get to Pathware Catholic, the greatest illustration of this is one Francis Bernardone. Do you know who that is? Francis Bernardone.
Textile fiber.
Francis Bernardone's father
Family.
was a very wealthy textile merchant. He was selling cloth. He had come from nothing, and textile merchants and things like that carved out, to a certain extent, a middle class, or what we would understand is that they weren't landed nobility. Now, we would say in the United States that we do not have landed nobility. I would argue that we do. Their last names are just a little different, like Zuckerberg or Gates, or Jobs, well, he's dead, Buffett. You know, these are those folks. Let's go back a little farther. The Carnegies. What are some other ones? The Vanderbilts,
Vanderbilt.
Rockefellers. We have landed nobility. We just don't call it that. Kennedys, landed nobility. Bushes, landed nobility. And that just those families continue on. We have the same thing. What we have always had in the midst of that is a middle that survived and continued. That is being phased out. And what we are arriving at is you are either rich or poor. It's one of the two. And the rich, you know, when I heard a guy say it the other day, when they're doing all that market speculation stuff like they're doing in Europe now they're talking about negative interest rates and all this other stuff, that affects the average dude. The billionaires and the millionaires that we all scream about and, you know, tax the rich, does it ever phase them? Did they ever lose one of their 5 homes? No. So what we have to understand is this concept of the poor versus the rich, not versus, but these two striking dichotomies, that's never existed in our country. We've had poor people, but you could come up from being poor. You could achieve something. The Rock, I just read this today, is the highest paid actor in Hollywood. He's making, what, $67 million a picture? Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. He's the highest paid actor in Hollywood. This year, made $67 million a film. Do you realize in 1992, he had $7 to his name? He was flat, busted, broke. Today, and what he said in the interview was, I wake up every day thinking that the foreclosure notice is at the doors. I get up and I go to work. Yeah. Sylvester Stallone sold stuff.
Sold his dog.
Pay for things for the script from
Went back
Rocky.
and- Yep, went back and bought that dog too.
So
Wow.
here, there has always been this notion that you can achieve something. You can build something.
It's America.
Yeah.
It's America.
hmm
Same.
So,
America.
yeah, America. Why are you eating onions? Because
Because I can't.
America. My son. So what we start to see in scripture when the Bible talks about the poor is something very different than what we understand as Americans, because we come at it different. So what about the poor and injustice? Should the church care about it? Now, obviously, the given answer to this is yes, we should. That's like, duh. Larger question is how and what's the basis for it? So the key idea here is very simple. I believe God calls all Christians to show compassion to people in need. You can get a room full of Christians from across the denominational spectrum, put them all in a room, and every one of them will agree with that statement. The greater problem is, what is compassion? How do you show it? And how do you meet the needs of people? Because that is where you'll get debate and disagreement. There's a key verse for this background. It says, defend the weak and the fatherless. Uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed. Rescue the weak and the needy and deliver them from the hand of the wicked. So let's just stop and ask a question, because I want to make this interactive, because I know what I think about this because I just preached about it. I want to know what you think. So first question, is God compassionate?
Yes.
Why? Yes. How's he demonstrated?
You're still here.
Yeah, I was saying not zapping. Not
That's
stopping
a really, really good answer.
Grace and mercy.
I mean, he didn't wipe out mankind
her.
again.
Right. What's that be right to?
So,
Supply our needs.
so let's define compassion a little bit. If God is compassionate, what is compassion?
You know what though, dude? See, there's more stuff that I always get stuck on. Because the stuff I read, stuff I hear, you know.
Feeling their pain.
Okay. Expound on that a little bit, Ron. Feeling their pain. What do you mean? Not Bill Clinton. I feel your pain. Remember that? I do a great Bill Clinton impersonation.
Being, having empathy for people.
Having empathy. So you feel for them. Compassion is a deep-rooted thing. Compassion is not, and you move on. Compassion is where it stirs the inward parts of you. It's felt deep down when you look at someone's situation. God looks at us and feels compassion. He is stirred in his innermost parts with empathy for us. Why is empathy hard? Especially today. Come on, I just preached about this.
Because some people are always, woe is me, and sometimes you think they should be helping themselves, and it doesn't look like they're helping themselves. You don't know their situation, but what you perceive is they just want sympathy, they want somebody to do it for them, but it could be something else going on that we don't see.
Yes, and yes to both. It's too easy to live today, and exactly what you said, Susan, but is there more? Why does it feel like it is harder today to be compassionate?
You drive by the guy at Walmart with the sign up.
Yes.
See,
Because you don't know who to believe anymore.
Everybody's
is that our
got.
job? Is that our job to believe him, judge him? Or is our job just to try to help him any way we can?
Everybody's got a hustle. I go back to that story of when me and the kids were all, and Cindy, we're all eating a Kentucky Fried Chicken one night. Now you got to understand, I hate going in fast food restaurants. I do not like to take the kids in. God gave us drive-thrus for a reason. You go through the drive-thru. You order off the dollar menu, and you're lucky if you get a drink, at least when I'm paying. But we stopped, and we were eating KFC in the Durango in the parking lot overlooking Kentucky Fried Chicken and the old dual highway Wendy's. Romantic, huh? Now, My first kiss with my wife was by the dumpster in that Wendy's parking lot. Isn't that awesome? So we're sitting there and we're overlooking, and the kids are all eating. And I looked at her and said, "Hey, you remember that parking lot, don't you?" And she's, "Yeah." And the kids are like, "What?" And I said, "You see that dumpster right there? That's a great way to start a story." And they're like, "Yeah, what about it?" I said, "I was standing right beside that when I got your first kiss from your mother." I'm like, "Ew, dumpsters?" Like, well, she was parked right beside it. We were just walking her to her car. About that time, this dude knocks on the window who was obviously homeless. And he's like, "Hey, man, you have $5?" Now, I had $5. What I was going to do was, well, actually what I did was I gave him $5. I said, "Here's $5. Let me take you up to the mission." He said, "Oh, okay. Well, thank you." Remember old Mita's Tavern?
Mhm.
There
Well,
in town. About the time we got close to Mita, Cindy hopped in the back. He was sitting in the passenger seat. I had the car still moving. I was probably doing 5 miles an hour because we were getting close to the light. "This is good enough." And that sucker hopped out, took my $5, walked right into Mita's Tavern and drank it up.
but you
And
might
you were
say,
surprised?
Hmm?
You were surprised?
At that point in life, I was a little naive. And it stroked me a little bit. You know, I mean,
The
it,
same guy that works the parking lot.
I'm just saying that you might have saved his life because DTs are a mother. And he might have really been hurt and he might need that drink.
true. I didn't know any of that. I was just thinking, man, that con picker's going to take him up to feed him, and he's sitting there drinking that away. And immediately what happens is our reflex kicks in, where it becomes very important to preserve ourselves. Because what happens if we get hustled? What do?
Get mad.
You get hard. It keeps you. You've been conned. It keeps you. The next time, are you more apt to help? No. Normally.
Empathy for when you're driving along and you see these people hitchhiking. Back when I was a teenager, I probably would have picked one up. Now that I have either my children or my grandchildren in the car, there's no way I'm stopping putting anybody in my car because I'm fearful of what they might do or might,
I've picked up a few in my day.
It used to
Can't do
be
that
when I was
today, though.
in the army, way back when Eisenhower was a corporal. You could thumb your way anywhere.
Mhm.
Anywhere. If you had a uniform on, so much the better. Anybody would pick you up. But now, it's totally different. It's totally different.
you have the uniform when they'll throw something at you.
Well,
Yeah.
you might run over you, then back over you.
There was a man panhandling out
Yeah,
at
it's not just
Food Line out on Wilson Boulevard. He was asking people for money. And he asked one of the managers out there when she came out to leave. And she told him no. And the next day when she came to work, believe it or not, he actually was out there when she came back the next day. He beat the crap out of her. He literally waited for her and he did. He really hurt her. And she quit her job. I mean, she was done.
So let's phrase this topic of let's
New level there.
Yeah, I mean,
Jeez.
you gotta.
Turn the other cheek.
let's first deal with this from the perspective of
I'm sure you would.
where the book comes from. So we specifically get to the book of Nehemiah. Now, by the time you get to Nehemiah, what's going on in Israel's history? I'm not giving you the answers anymore. Y'all got to know this stuff. What had happened?
Captivity.
Captivity. What happened to Jerusalem? I just read this in Jeremiah. What happened to Jerusalem?
Pretty much it is.
Nebuchadnezzar went through there and it was wiped it out. Scorched earth policy, baby. He tore it down. What happened to the king? Does anybody remember?
King. Jerusalem?
Uh-huh.
I don't think he fared very well.
He did not.
Brought into captivity too, wasn't he?
Yes, but what happened to him before he went to captivity? And I just read it this morning.
They blinded,
Yes, but what did they do before they blinded him?
taking his fish hooks.
No, they made him watch his own kids be killed right in front of him, and then they blinded him.
Because that was the last thing he'd ever see.
It's the last thing you'd ever see. So Israel had it bad. Refer to one quick why. What were they doing that led to all of this? Yes.
Disobeying God.
Idolatry and stuff.
Disobedience to God.
Yeah.
led
But they were lived
to
for
destruction.
was it they were promised so that they would have a return, and
Even
that's
the
when the
Nehemiah
Nehemiah was talking about.
So even in the midst of
Time's up.
all of this bad stuff that they did that led to all this destruction, God says there's going to be a remnant. That's why Jeremiah does that transaction. Business will take place again. Destruction's coming, but there will be a day of restoration. By the time you get to Nehemiah, you have the situation where this dude has access to the king, and he feels bad for his people. So he's mourning, and the king asks him why. Then he tells him, what does the king say?
He helps them supply because they wanted to rebuild the wall to Jerusalem. So he put him in charge of things and basically supplied him everything he needed to start the work.
Isn't it fascinating to think that this king, who that's conquered territory, he really doesn't need to do anything with it, does he? Shows enough compassion to say, okay, go rebuild it. So they have the opportunity to go back and rebuild. Why? Because of compassion. And there's this great prayer that goes through Nehemiah where, and there's 38 verses. We're not going to read it all, but you look at all the times where compassion is mentioned, that God is gracious, God is compassionate, God is merciful. Those characteristics are absolutely essential to the nature and character of God. So should they be, as a result, essential to the nature and character of Christians? So are we compassionate? Are we really? Probably a better way to say it.
Truthfully, probably not.
I like to think that you can use, it's interesting when you start to dig into the Old Testament, but how big of a deal compassion was. Why was it a big deal then?
But there was no social programs back then.
There's no social
I mean,
programs.
you know, they had the same social security as they do in India. You get to a certain age, they put you on the side of the road. You know?
Uh-huh.
So if you can't take care of yourself,
Which means life was what?
it is over there. Cheap.
Life was cheap. Life was hard.
There was no safety nets. No
There was not, there were no safety nets. So one of the things that we wrestle with in our day in the church is it the church's job to be the safety net? Or have we ceded that role to the government?
Well, the government's kind of taken over. I don't know if it's ceded it to them. They have definitely taken
I
over.
would say we ceded it, then they took over. Around the time of the what?
Was it the Depression,
Yes, and what came out of the Depression?
Social Security.
That too. It was a big package.
The welfare was, you
The
know,
New Deal.
The New Deal.
We'll take care of you.
We had a new deal. We're going to take care of you. You put in and we're going to do this. And what you start to see is this erosion of the responsibility and the small ceding to the church that you jump forward. Let's call that, how many years from the New Deal till today? Let's call it what?
Almost
Those are
80,
about
76.
70 or 80 years.
So let's round it up. Let's call it 80 years. So 80 years is how many generations?
Probably two.
So 2 generations. So from FDR to now, 2 generations, and we now have a group of kids who can't do anything and without the assistance of government. We think it is the government's job to solve a problem. It's why there are politicians freaking out about the Cajun Navy. Remember, we talked about them last week. Those folks down there helping with the flood, they're just ordinary dudes, flat-bottom boats. All of a sudden, someone wants them to pay a tax.
Actually answered everything.
Yeah, well, that's not government doing it, so it doesn't count. Do you see what it's created? It's created this notion where one of the chief driving forces of the nature and character of God, compassion, has been given over to other things. Now, if you add that with the poll that I read, I don't know, Tuesday, that Americans are increasingly less likely to attend church, any religious experience at all. They've become nuns. and not Nuns, Nones, and the increasing doubt of the existence of miracles. Why?
Because the church has been relegated to people who will not tithe, they will not serve, they will not, they will not help build the church. They come to the church for a show,
Yes.
and that's what they want on Sunday morning, a show.
Right.
Yes.
So anything else involving the church, that's too much. If I'm required to put 10% of my pay in there, that's too much. If I'm required to help families or other things, that's too much. I don't want that type of commitment. I want the spectacle on a Sunday morning, and that's all I want.
So let's contrast.
So I can have a feel-good day.
Let's contrast. The contrast I want to draw goes back to something that was way back in the beginning of your book, in the introduction. The author talks about the idea that when Rome was suffering from a plague, who went in?
The church believers went in.
Believers went in, worked with the sick,
They did.
prayed for the
Nobody
sick,
else went.
and did those things. Does the average Christian consumer, will they do that today? Or does the mindset become, man, I'm just getting out of here. I have nothing I can do about that. That's a state's job. That's the job of in that day it would have been, that's the job of the Roman civic authority. Let them deal with that. They've got houses for the sick. But they all took off too. So we have to ask ourselves, and this follows through, we'll deal with this historically. This follows through the fall of the Roman Empire. Now, what do we call the period after the fall of Rome? Very good. Man, Debbie, you were on it. The Dark Ages. During the Dark Ages, what were the houses of learning?
The churches.
The churches.
Who invented hospitals?
The nuns.
People, the hospitallers, they were an order of knights. They were helping the sick, traveling pilgrims. Who were the guys who were, now this is loaded, but during the plague was one of the ways that they helped stop it? Boiling water to make beer. Now, I'm not advocating the drinking of alcohol, but in that case, they were making beer and drinking it rather than drinking the infected water that the rats and all that stuff had ran through. So it was boiling out some of the bacteria, and that's one of those little things. Who was making that stuff? Priests, monks.
That was the extra income.
PBR didn't exist.
That was extra income.
It was not the Dos Equis guy. He wasn't around yet. The most interesting man in the world was not around. What you see in the history of the church is that it is at its best when it is being compassionate. Why do we remember Mother Teresa? Because she was compassionate. Because she walked into the slums of Calcutta with $1.35 to her name. And she started bandaging the wounds of lepers. If God is compassionate, God is near the people who need compassion. Shouldn't we be the same? That was a big deal in the Old Testament because you have example after example after example of seeing this idea that compassion is there. It gives us Ruth and Boaz as one of those examples. Boaz is a pretty cool guy. He's got enough that he's saying, hey, look. And isn't it interesting that compassion was built into the law? When you glean your fields, leave the edges. Why? For the poor. Yeah, it wasn't. Let's rephrase it. It was not legislated. It was expected. We try to legislate compassion in that we say we're going to tax people to fund programs. Does it ever change this? Legislation never changes this. True compassion comes from the heart. It comes from caring enough because God cared for you to care for others. That's hard. It's hard to be compassionate in a world where everybody has a hustle. But why do people have a hustle?
To get ahead, make money.
You have to live in the fast lane.
Got to live, got to make money. Have to what? Starts with an S. People have to survive. In the end, it's that human instinct of survival, right, wrong, or indifferent, that creates this notion of, man, I got to hustle to make something happen. I don't always agree with it. But in the end, it's people trying to survive. So should it dictate then what the church does? Like, let's rephrase it this way. Let's bring this up to today. Now, we've had a huge debate in our own city about the homeless. And there are certain segments of our society here in our good old city that have a huge problem with the homeless being here. Laying aside the fact that it's not about let's solve it.
Let's get rid of it.
Let's get rid of them. Let's just push them to the side. Why?
I want to see them.
I don't want to see them. It's inconvenient. You know, no one likes it when they walk into the library bathroom and there's some poor homeless fella passed out with one of those cheap bottles of vodka laying by his side. But how many times does that happen? You know, when the fancy art school went in, one of the conversations that we were involved in as a church was, hey, can you move where you feed people to maybe draw some of them away from downtown, because the people at the art school are scared of the homeless people. Involved in that conversation. When all we're thinking about is let's go feed homeless people. These guys are hungry. Let's make sure they got something to eat. No one should go to bed hungry at a bare minimum.
You wish you had this story to say, where's your compassion?
Well, but even no, it's no longer about, well, there's the second mindset. The second mindset is, are we helping people or are we enabling them? That's the conversation that follows that. Is where are we enabling people?
And a lot of times we are.
I don't think food enables people.
Well, food.
Money can enable.
That's an issue. Are you helping them to continue on the wrong path?
Mm-hmm.
Or are you really helping somebody out of the jam?
So this starts to speak to what the church should be doing. We don't need to jump tons through this book to get this whole idea, because I don't think we need to be convinced to be compassionate, because I think we get it. We understand when Jesus says, if you did this to the least of these, you did it to me. Like, we've got a food drop coming up in October. When we doing that? October the 10th, October the 11th. It's after my anniversary. So we're doing a food drop in October. And people are going to come in here and they're going to get food. Now, hopefully there aren't none of those nasty
Bars.
big carrots, which would be awesome, but those nasty bars. Remember those disgusting honey? Oh, God, those honey mustard and almond bars.
Those were good. I like them.
You are nuts.
I wish that somebody would have took the whole case.
And that's really.
The what?
You are insane. Those things were nasty.
Whatever, man. They were good for the gym, bro.
Ew.
I got a case at the house. You want it?
Dunkin'
They
and
were good for
something.
the
That's
gym,
the only
man.
one I like.
Halfway through the workout.
Next thing you know, they're shoving.
Oh, they're gross. Ugh.
She broke them up and used it for a salad topping. And
Yeah, that's
they're
what I
really
did.
good
I
that
ran
way.
through the food process.
I heard you could also seal your driveway with them.
They're good one. And I also used it when I did it that way when I cooked chicken and bacon.
Don't take off rust too.
Take off rust.
So does Coke.
You might be able to stop a bullet with one of them things. Oh, they were gross.
You
But
want
we're
a
gonna-
case? You want some? I'll bring you a case. They're in my basement.
We're going to do the food drop. So here comes the next question. People are going to come in here to get food. I love doing it. I'd do one once a month if we could get away with it. What else do we offer them?
We offer our ears to listen. We offer prayer if they want it. Just somebody to talk to. There's ladies that come in and they'll sit down beside me and talk to me while I'm checking other people in, because they've been here several times and they see my face there every time.
Mhm.
And
We
they
offer
just
them
sit and they
salvation.
talk. They just need someone to listen.
Everything that we've said goes with it. So what we have to then ask ourselves as a congregation, let's just talk about this, because this is compassion. Just offering food is a good thing to do. It is the compassionate thing to do. But is it the whole?
We offer them a place to come and share in the Word of God. We've had a few of those people come and sit on services. I mean, they don't come all the time, but they'll stop in every now and then.
I can point to one. Little old lady who sits
Yes,
2 rows up,
yes.
started from a food drop.
I remember that too, because she was so tickled that people would talk to her
Mhm.
and ask her questions, and she hasn't stopped.
So what we also offer, what the church should do, is offer the next steps. Like, we're going to start mentoring kids very soon in this building that are coming from Western Heights. They're coming from there. We're going to start mentoring these kids. That's a first step. What's the next step? Next step is, as a reward, they get sponsored for the karate program. And we're not teaching them to punch and kick. Any idiot can punch and kick. We're molding people. You know, we give those kids those character lessons, those building lessons that draws them then eventually, when it's 5 minutes before class, they don't even realize what I'm doing sometimes. And I'm saying, hey, take the next 5 minutes, close your eyes, and pray. Study the creed. Meditate if you need to. Let's start the process of your spiritual development, 5 minutes at a time, without them even realizing I'm doing it. And you start to see them at first, and I give them a little snap of the finger and a wave to shut the eyes. And the next thing you know, their eyes are closed. They're controlling their breathing. And then it's okay. Let's take the next step. So those subtle things that are about offering a way beyond just where someone is part of what compassion has to be. You know, I think the author's premise is there are people who need to learn the lesson that God's love and love for other people is related, because that's on the bottom of page 139. But come on, let's get real. We've had that conversation. We get this. I talk about it all the time. What we need to look at is how to do it. I find it interesting that this chapter was short. Do you know why it's short? Because everybody wants to talk about getting their hands dirty. What happens when you actually have to? So what we have to ask ourselves is how, not if, but how do we get our hands dirty? This is the crux of what the church faces. When it becomes how, we all get quiet.
Get the trenches. That's what you do.
Yeah, okay, let's start with that. What is in the trenches? Now, we get it from a First World War perspective.
Homeless people, addiction, mental illness. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. Drive around, open your eyes up, pull your car over, stop, talk to somebody. Get in the trenches, man. Get your hands dirty. Talk about it, be about it.
Yeah.
Get in the trenches, man. Find these people that are killing themselves out here.
So let's start with that one, because we got a Narcan training coming up. Let's start with the fact that we face, as a city, not a problem.
Epidemic.
You stole my word. We face an epidemic. Heroin is killing people. And you can have folks say, I mean, let's take this from an evolutionary perspective. If heroin kills you, now this is incredibly cold, but from an evolutionary perspective, if you die of a heroin overdose, that's survival of the fittest. That's natural selection. You just weren't cut out to make it. Now, that's not the Christian worldview. The Christian worldview is, I feel compassion for those people. We have to do something. Jesus looked on the masses and said they were harassed and helpless. Like what? Sheep without a shepherd. Jesus is obviously the good shepherd. He proclaimed himself as such. In what gospel? Pop quiz.
John.
Okay, good. John, you got it. You better have gotten that one, Doug, because you're a resident Bible scholar. If you missed that one, we're in trouble. So
I said, no, you guys.
so if they were harassed and hopeless like sheep without a shepherd, the characteristic of a sheep is what?
Timid.
No clue.
Dumb animal.
The sheep are dumb animal. The sheep will wander from what
Need protection.
to what?
You just wander around aimlessly unless somebody guides them.
Well, not necessarily aimlessly. What are they looking for?
They look for food, so they go from pasture to pasture.
They go from pasture to pasture. Aimless,
Find
just
everything
where's it at?
And they
Just-
will follow
He's looking for grass.
anybody.
Mhm.
with all the crowd too.
The
because
sheep-
The crowd will go over the cliff if
Yeah,
the
go
one
right over
starts
the
going.
cliff.
The sheep look to fill what?
belonging,
The belly.
Their stomach.
film.
Sheep look to fill their stomach. Are we really any different?
No. No, we don't.
It's a good analogy, like sheep. We have gone.
Tell me the Bible doesn't know what it's talking about. We'd say, no, we have higher cognitive skills and higher reasoning and all these other things. But in the end,
Look at where we're going.
Chase what we
we chase what we need.
We're going from the most prosperous nation in the world under capitalism to
Mm.
socialism or communism.
Amen.
That makes no sense.
Amen.
But, you know,
So the question then comes,
Very.
knowing all of these things, what do we do?
Somebody's not welcome.
Well, one, first, for myself, I pray about what can I do, because sometimes I know there's been times in my life where held back because fearful of like, I don't know what to do. It's overwhelming. What can one person do? So I started praying about it and listening to God. What do you want me to do? Instead of just jumping into, because the world has all kinds of solutions, programs and all that stuff. But what specifically do you want me to do, God? And one of the things is starting to find out about some of the community things like the Narcan thing, finding out if there's volunteer places I can volunteer at and things like that.
Debbie just hit the
And
first and
just
most
what?
important point of compassion is what can I do? When a bunch of eyes get together, let me rephrase that. What is an avalanche but a bunch of snowflakes who decided I can go in the same direction? I mean, that's very metaphoric, but do you get it? One snowflake melts on your hand. An avalanche buries you. So what if we all started thinking the same thing? What can I do? What is it? And it's God. Tell me, what are you putting in front of me so that I can accomplish something? I mean, some people try to think it's like you're whispering in the middle of a storm. No one's going to hear it. I would offer as evidence the parable of the 99 sheep. Shepherd went after the what? The one. You ever had 99 sheep together going, meh, meh? Forgive my horrible sheep impersonation. But when you get all those sheep together, it's loud, isn't it? It's noisy. Yeah, it's noisy. There's a lot of mess. And you would think, I'm so busy with all of the noise. I forget to go after the one. But in the end, isn't that kind of the point of being a Christian? Because God goes after the what? That's why it's not just that we're saved as a group, but that it requires a personal encounter with God. So if we were to take that to the next step, we had a personal encounter with God. Therefore, other people need to have that personal encounter. And what if they only have it if we go? So this idea of compassion goes with last week's lesson, because we have to see as God sees. When God looks at the hustler, what does God see?
His son or daughter.
Yeah. When God looks at us, what does he see?
Children.
So does God see a difference between us and the hustler? Does God see a difference between us? And I'll admit, there have been people over the years when I ran food banks and compassion ministries in the places that I've been on staff, you met some people who were shady.
absolutely will always have
hustling.
And it was always hard to load those cars because you knew what was going to happen to it.
That's not up to us.
You're right. It's not.
Right, that's- The big eyes are little U's.
So no matter what, if we look at someone else, what should we see? Mother Teresa said it best, but I want to see if you guys know what it is.
We should see ourselves. We're supposed to love others as we love ourselves. So if we see other people, we should be seeing a reflection of us.
Yes. Mother Teresa got a little more specific. This is one of her famous quotes. I want to see if anybody knows it. I'll give you the Jeopardy clock.
Yes, God loves us. Reflection of Christ.
Close. Close. Her words were that whenever she looked at someone, she didn't see the person, she saw the image of Jesus. And she considered serving every person as an act of worship to God. So how do we take that first step with that? Should that change how we treat people? Should it change how we see them? Should it change our compassionate heart and make it more compassionate? Because it's not, and I'll admit, I wrestle with that one because it's not, I see the hustler and I have to remember that's not that. If I'm doing this right, I have to see the image of Jesus. And this is not me being hustled. It's an act of worship.
Because it's not so much that, well, God is working on them too, but he's working on us individually.
Mhm.
That we'll have people in our lives like that instead of they're concerned with them.
I know in my own personal experience, at first it would bother me, but now I don't care. Like everybody says, oh, well, I'll buy them food, but I won't give them money. I give them money. What they do with that is, you know what I mean? That's not changing me one little iota. My compassion is my compassion. I do it, Like I said before, they might need a drink. They might need that drug. Am I going and buying it for them? No. But I would have stopped to help them anyway.
Every time I did that, I would drive on home, watching them under a bridge with a bottle of wine.
It's all right.
That's what happened to me
You still helped them out though.
sometimes.
So how do we take
So
the
you
step?
still did your role.
How do we
right?
take the
That's
step
Christian.
beyond that, though? Is there a step beyond that?
Well, that's between them and their higher power, man. That's between them and God.
Yes, but should we open the door and say, hey, I'm going through this door. Won't you come with me?
Well, I believe that you can build a. See, that's the thing, man. I mean, it's hard when you're in the trenches like that because you can't automatically do that right away. Because
True.
then you might lose the prospect.
Yep.
I mean, how many times I've had people say, why are you doing this? Why? I don't understand why you're doing it. That leaves a door open for me.
Yeah.
Tell you what, brother, I'll be back next week. If you're here, I'll talk to you. A lot of times they're not there, but if they are there, and I can talk to them, then I can start building up a repertoire. If I go out there and I'll give them money and I'm like, listen, bro, let me talk to you about Jesus Christ, they're going to be like, I want to hear it.
So let's add a piece to this then. So compassion may not necessarily be, because I'm trying to mine this out of you, compassion may not necessarily be just the throwing of money at a problem.
Absolutely not.
It's to walk with them through whatever is going on.
Yes. So to add a piece, John 1:14 says what? The word became flesh and dwelt what?
Among us.
Huh?
Within us.
Among us.
Amongst us.
So isn't it interesting that one of the great human examples of that, Mother Teresa, didn't go home. Calcutta became her home. There were people when we planted in the west end of town. He said, "You're going over there?" Yeah. Really? Yeah. There's some folks who are relatively new here who are going through the membership class who, when they told their friends where they were going, they said, "Ooh, you go there? That's dangerous." It's the west end of Hagerstown. It's not Compton.
I really don't find our end of town any dangerous in north or south or the east?
It's not. It's
Part of
just
the
It's
West
not.
End I
It's
grew up
just
in.
the-
I live in the South End. I got MS-13 right down the street. So how much more dangerous can you get?
Keep
I
talking on
grew up
Franklin Street.
outside the projects in the West End,
You know,
and they're no longer the projects.
and I talk to those kids all the time,
It's just because
trying to
the
get
West
them
End
on the
got
right
bad
road
rap.
here.
Mhm.
You know, and I talk to them all the time.
Now, there's some areas of this area.
That's
I mean, you wanna go
everywhere.
over
Pretty
there
bad.
by Mitchell and all
Right.
that.
It's
You know that.
everywhere.
Go hang out at that laundromat right down the street here at about 10 o'clock at night. It's interesting.
Oh, yeah, I was in that laundromat one time doing laundry. I don't go
It's
back
interesting.
there.
You can hang out at Walmart at 10 o'clock at night. It's interesting.
shoot. You can hang out at Walmart at 12 o'clock during the day,
Yeah.
and it's pretty interesting.
I go to Walmart all the time and wonder, doesn't anybody work in this town?
I was there today because I had to get the stuff to make your chili, which is incidentally over there. And I'm standing there today and I'm looking around, and my thought was, this is really like the bar scene from Star Wars. It was just, it was interesting. The only thing that was lacking was the band and a dude with a lightsaber. It was very creative and colorful. And I'm looking around and I'm thinking, man, Hagerstown has changed.
We got portable meth labs in the bathrooms.
It's changed. And here's how it's changed. Man once said to me that old Hagerstown, let's go back 15, 20 years, has been beat to death with the word of God. Church on every corner.
Bar on every
Well, but they're only halfway filled.
What God has brought you is your mission field right in front of you. You don't have to go anywhere. Just go walk outside.
That's true everywhere, actually.
It's
It
true
is.
everywhere, but it is now in your face. We've always known it's there. Now it's in your face with heroin deaths, some naked dude jumping, trying to jump from a school bus.
On the bus.
I was I got my license renewed this morning, and my picture didn't turn out bad. But yay me.
So you got the new
Yeah,
license.
you, right.
It's on the way. They mail them to you.
Yeah, I
So
heard that.
it's coming. But the lady previewed my picture because I said, "Do I look hideous?" And she goes, "Oh no, sir, you look quite handsome." Ha ha! Yeah.
They're paid to make you feel.
Oh, probably. They probably tell them just suck up no matter how bad they look. So yeah,
Yeah, you go to Walmart quite a bit.
Yeah,
I do. I do because it's on the way home. I was there. Yeah, it's there. So
I hate that place.
Me
I'm-
too.
I don't necessarily.
Every time I ask Bob in church if I can go shopping, that way he doesn't yell at me because we're in church. Well, last night we went to Walmart, and every time I ask him if we go shopping, he'll say, "You can spend $6." That's his famous quote, $6. Last night we went to Walmart, and I went to the women's place. Well, they had 2 racks there, $1 racks. I spent
Take 6
$2.
items.
I spent $2. I was so proud of myself. I said, "Here." And he says, "How much did you spend?" I said, $2. He said, "What?" I said, $2. I said, "Eat that now."
I go there a lot.
Yeah, you do.
I go there to get stuff, and admittedly, I go there to people watch.
My
because-
daughter-in-law works there, and she tells me horrendous stories. Horrendous stories.
I have seen things
He works there.
Yes.
that make you question. It makes you question the concept that evolution spirals upward.
Well, it really doesn't.
It makes you wonder.
It
I
goes
just want to
down.
know when it became socially acceptable to wear pajamas.
Isn't that
Oh my
something?
goodness, some of the things they wear, I hope, did you look in the mirror before you walked out the house?
So let's think about it.
Some years ago.
If we can make a historical comparison. Now, colonialism had its bad parts, right? We can all acknowledge that.
Yeah.
But isn't one of those interesting things the concept that the civilization was brought to those who didn't have it? Isn't it kind of interesting that we find ourselves in a place with folks who it's crazy and they don't know any better and it's wild and there's no gospel and it might look a little different and it might sound a little different, but the fundamental principle is the same. Mankind is lost and it needs a savior, and we have that message. And as we disciple folks, it becomes, okay, there's a better way. There's a different road that you can take. There's a different thing that you can walk. And that begins with exactly what Danny said, getting in the trenches. So we'll close with the idea of the trench? What do we know about being in trenches?
It's dirty and nasty.
It's dirty.
It's hard to get out of once you're in, depending on how far you've dug your trench.
Yeah. Let's go with the First World War. Famous for trench combat.
It's supposed to protect you from artillery.
Yes. The trench itself, when you got into trench combat, what do we know about it? It was up close. It was personal.
Terrible resistance.
It was brutal.
You can get killed.
It was hard.
It was a maze a lot of times too,
Yeah.
if you didn't know it.
You had to be able to navigate.
That's right.
Another interesting thing is that trench warfare became sustained. It was the long war. Why? Because nobody, everybody's just, they're in their entrenched position and they're just firing back at one another. And it took a long time and it led to stalemate. You had to have the long view in the trench. Because if you only think about the fact that what is in front of you is dirty, nasty, and hard, and that's all you ever think about, do you ever get anywhere?
And
No.
And they never did.
They never did.
It's amazing when you look at World War One, the Battle of the Somme, the Battle of the Marne.
Mhm.
Both battles, about 1 million men died. And it's interesting, it was almost absolutely the same casualty count on both sides. There was no winner there. There was just 500,000 troops on each side that died.
So,
And yet there were stories, I always read stories about, like at Christmas time,
Mhm.
they would cease fire and men from both sides would exchange stuff with each other. The way you see sports guys, like after a game, they'll exchange
Mhm.
jerseys with. It
Mhm.
was almost the same thing back then.
so here's what I want to do to close this out. I want to give each of you some homework. Everybody all right with a little homework?
Sure.
I mean,
This is easy homework.
I had enough homework already.
I want you between now and next Thursday, outside of reading your book and doing your stuff and your memory verses and all of that, what I want you to do is I want you to write down 3 ways, just 3, that you can start being compassionate where you are. And here's the 3. 1 in your personal life, 1 in your church, 1 in your community. 1 for each. And we're going to share them. So with that, we will stop